U.S. President Donald Trump made a bold prediction that the coronavirus vaccine will be developed by the end of the year and vows the plague will pass as well. To talk more about it is U.S. correspondent and our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, will the vaccine come from a lab in the United States, maybe here in Canada? How about Israel?
Wherever it comes from, it will be very much welcomed all over the world. We've even heard terrorists and anti-Israel leaders say, even if the vaccine ends up coming from Israel, we'll be allowed to use it, although they boycott all the other goods coming from Israel and the BDS movement. I think all eyes are on the clock more than anything else. And even though there is this push to get the vaccine out, there is a united front on who's going to have the vaccine, but yet there's also a competitive front as to who's going to, which lab privately will be the lab to come up with the vaccine that everybody is waiting with a bated breath. I think so many lives depend on this. Society depends on this. People can come out, live normal lives knowing that the vaccine exists. Now, whether or not people will go for it is another conversation to be had, but all eyes are on that clock.
Could you imagine the money that some of these pharmaceutical companies are going to make? Unbelievable. And there are reports that China hid the severity of the coronavirus to hoard supplies. Tell me more about that.
Right. So U.S. leaders, more specifically Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, accused China of hiding the news about the coronavirus and not sharing it with the WHO or the rest of the world in a timely fashion, and that they hid that news for multiple reasons, and one of which being that they wanted to give themselves time to accumulate masks and gloves and all the other PPE equipment so that they could again have the market edge in selling that equipment just like they are currently. This is the lowest of the low, and this is what China's been doing. You have to remind yourself that before Donald Trump became president, I mean, if you look at interviews that he had in the 80s, he would always talk about the fact that other countries take advantage of the United States and the West in general with regards to trade, with regards to import, export. And if you fast forward to the 90s, and it was Bill Clinton who prided himself on getting cheap goods and cheap labor and getting all of our manufacturing moved overseas to China. And now we're paying for it. We're absolutely paying for it. And not just in the sense that this virus, which is obviously the worst culmination of paying for it, quote unquote, but it's that all of our essential supplies come from China, from essential to non-essential. We rely on them instead of the other way around.
Hostile states are attempting to hack British universities and scientific facilities to steal research related to COVID-19. Lisa, that includes vaccine development.
Right. So this is going back to the competitive side of knowing about COVID-19 and more specifically about the development of a vaccine. British experts are saying that attempts have been made into universities and research centers who have an edge on getting a vaccine out, but they have yet to succeed. Look, right now, cyber hacking is at an all-time high. And myself, I was hacked just a week ago. They know we're sitting around. They know that people will have a hard time getting in touch with banks and other facilities to get set up again, to have them to get their email addresses acquired again. So they know that guards are down, vulnerabilities are high, and they are going to seize upon that. Now, again, this information or intellectual property is always something that is very much cherished and something that hackers go for, particularly the main three: China, Russia, and Iran. They've always been copycat stealers of information, intellectual property. They copy drone technology, they copy military technology, and of course they will try to copy vaccine technology right now. So no surprise here.
In various provinces across Canada, we're easing some of the restrictions when it comes to the COVID-19 lockdown, Lisa. Europe is also preparing to ease lockdowns as Italy, Spain, and France saw new lows when it came to COVID-related deaths.
Yes, so again, all eyes being on Europe because they are leading, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the curve. They're ahead of where other countries may be or other continents may be right now. We're looking at Italy, we're looking at France, we're looking at Spain, and Italy, who had the exponential rise in the number of casualties, has started to flatten the curve, so to speak. They have had multiple days of lower and lower number of fatalities, and therefore they are going to allow people to go to parks and to start having social distancing visits with extended family members, etc. This couldn't come at a better time. It's May now, and the weather's getting nicer in all parts of the world, and people are looking forward to getting out, getting fresh air. We talked about how we talk about the other side effects of COVID-19. So, the economic side effects, the social and psychological side effects of quarantining and not being able to go out, not being able to visit elderly family, young family, etc. So this is definitely going to be a good thing as long as we can keep those numbers low.
What's really interesting about France, however, they've extended the coronavirus health emergency and will quarantine all travelers for 14 days.
This includes people who are French citizens, by the way. So if you leave France, you want to come back in, and the rationale behind this makes sense, sort of. It's that they are quarantining their society, and if you leave or want to re-enter, then you need to re-quarantine so that you make sure that you're not bringing the virus from anywhere else back into the country, whether you're visiting or whether you are a native there. France has had an interesting fluctuation in numbers, and I think when they saw their numbers rise again, they had to clamp down and make sure that people aren't jogging, they're not going out to the parks, they're not going out to the sightseeing areas, and now this 14 days of quarantine for anybody who's coming in or out.
Meanwhile, in South America, Brazil has seen coronavirus cases rise about 100,000.
Yeah, for some reason, well, it makes sense because it's a high number, but 100,000 is the mark. So countries that are reporting 100,000 cases suddenly, rethink their approach and have to, really crack down on their quarantining and social distancing to prevent the virus from spreading any further. Brazil had that exact situation. It hit them a bit later than other places, so they're experiencing the curve on the way up. Hopefully, they will be able to flatten it very soon. But in the meantime, they're cracking down. They're trying to make sure that this number doesn't grow any further than the 105,000 is the latest number I heard.
Now, still in South America, Venezuela is accusing Colombia of attempting a terrorist sea invasion. Venezuela claims it foiled an attack backed by the United States.
Yeah, it sounds like a scene from Fauda, if you've seen that series on Netflix. It's about the Gaza and Palestinian and Israeli ongoing war. But this is a similar accusation that they make, that Venezuela accuses Colombia in cahoots with the United States of staging an attack by sea on Venezuela. And if you recall, Venezuela and Colombia, they cut diplomatic ties just last year when Colombia was calling out Venezuela and Maduro in particular for the crackdowns on protesters, for the human rights abuses there. And Colombia is laughing this off and saying this is nonsense. Nothing of the sort occurred.
Now, the last time we spoke, the question about whether North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was alive or dead was up in the air. That question may have been answered as Kim was seen recently at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Oh, and North and South Korean troops were exchanging fire along their border.
Here we go again, North Korea back in the headlines, and for a while there they weren't in the headlines, then they were competing with the COVID-19 headlines, and now, okay, he's back. So, it's not strange for Kim Jong-un to kind of disappear from, the public eye. He's done this before, but what was strange is that he missed his grandfather's the commemoration of his birthday. His grandfather has passed away. Obviously, he has great respect and reverence for his family, for his grandfather, somebody he looked up to. So the fact that he was missing, that's what gave birth to so many of these rumors. And then subsequently, he was missing from some other important state-level events, which again furthered the conspiracy or the rumor that he is ill or recovering or missing or dead. And now he's made his appearance again, and all is well. On the other hand, we have North Korea back in the news because they exchanged fire with South Korea. They launched a missile against a guard tower there. And Secretary of State Pompeo here in the United States dismissed this whole thing and said, we think it's pretty much accidental. It didn't escalate. There were no fatalities, and we're thinking it's just something that happened by accident.
You know, and it turns out Kim Jong-un did not even have heart surgery as first reported. Like, what is that all about? How do you say it was botched heart surgery, the guy's dead, let's move on? You know, news agencies were reporting, and it's like, no, he didn't even have heart surgery. How can you get that so wrong?
Right. So you have local news sources on both sides very confident about this. The news that he was dead, let alone about the heart surgery, the news that he was dead came from very confident Hong Kong news sources. And the, again, alleged story that he didn't even have the heart surgery came from South Korea. So, you know, I think countries in the region, what's their agenda? What are they trying to push? Who's telling the truth? Who's not? You know, we'll never know whether or not he had heart surgery or not. We'll have to obviously keep an eye on his health, but we know we don't get any answers or any much of the truth from North Korea. The regime tries to keep everything very, very secret. But as I said on a radio show, you know, recently, it's amazing what we do know about Kim Jong-un, the fact that he likes Twinkies or that he travels with a gold toilet. And then the things that we don't know about him: is he alive? You know, did he have heart surgery? So the regime is very protective of him. They're very selective of what gets out, how they tell their stories, and it smells very much like an authoritarian regime, which they are. So there you have it.
Lisa, let's talk a bit more about COVID-19 once again and the pandemic. We're seeing here in Canada so many people recovering, which is wonderful to see, of the coronavirus. But let's talk about some of the more hard-hit areas in the United States where there's a lot of high density, including New York State and where you are in California. Are you seeing a lot of people recovering from the virus?
You know, there's a lot of people who, in the days that will follow, in the months to follow, if they can get themselves an antibody test, we're going to probably hear about a lot of people who had a very mild case of coronavirus and were able to recover or not show symptoms, etc. What does manifest, and it is visible to the eye, is the people who are affected, are going to the hospital, that require ventilators, that are unfortunately even passing away. New York City was hard hit. I mean, that became the epicenter of this entire virus, and that is because, you know, they live in such close quarters. I lived in New York City for many years, and I'll tell you, it's impossible to walk down the street and not, you know, be in somebody's face. You're rubbing elbows and you're breathing on each other. The work conditions are the same with cubicles and getting in and out of buildings and the elevators and the handles and the subways and the buses, public transportation, et cetera. So I think, you know, this virus spread very quickly in the first weeks of March and the final weeks of February, before anybody even knew that it was spreading. So, you know, in high density areas like New York City and Los Angeles, but more so New York City, this virus was spreading before people knew it, and unfortunately became too late. I personally know people who have been affected. I know, you know, people who have family members who have unfortunately passed away. But because of these stories, people are being extra vigilant. While, as you know, there's also another narrative here in the United States with people protesting to open up businesses, to not, you know, throw out the baby with the bathwater, and to punish the states that are actually doing well and whose numbers don't really warrant a complete shutdown of the economy. So, you know, we're going to see a gradual opening up. We heard Donald Trump say that there is going to be, you know, a very logical path forward. Governors have to involved and decide, and what we do hope, we're not guaranteed this, but what we do hope is that governors and local officials are able to put their partisan politics aside and to decide what's best for the people of each state, rather than what's best for the election, what's best for federal funding, what's best for, you know, making Donald Trump look good or bad, etc. So we are all in this together, and if there were ever a unifying time or period in my life or anybody's life right now, I think this is it. And let's really lean on that and not let partisan politics divide us or hide the truth from us in any way.
How about your frontline workers and your first responders? How strained is your system right now, especially the healthcare system in the United States?
It depends on the area. You have places where, my sister, for example, is a medical resident at a hospital in California, and I spoke to her last night. She got her roster for this morning. 5 out of 7 of her patients were COVID positive. So it's there. It's definitely there. Now, she actually explained to me how they had, patients with such varying symptoms that it was very hard to detect. One patient she thought was a complete GI case, and they called in a GI to do some tests, and he said, test this guy for COVID. This is not a classic GI case. And sure enough, he was COVID positive. Now imagine all the healthcare workers, the nurses, the assistants, et cetera, that worked on this guy and did his labs and did his vitals before knowing that he was COVID positive. In New York, it's the opposite. You don't have that luxury of waiting to test. You have to test. I have a friend who's a physician in the ER in New York City, and she says, they basically don't even triage certain patients who are in such a bad case, whether it's their age or the advancement of the virus or underlying conditions. They have lung conditions or heart condition, then they won't even get the treatment. They'll kind of defer that treatment to someone who's younger and actually has a chance. Very sad, and very real, these cases, yeah.
U.S. correspondent Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining me from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.